So my main concern is a sudden run on the banks. Now, I'm not talking about these big high street banks like your HSBCs, your Barclays, your RBS, etc. I'm talking about these new challenger banks, such as Monzo, Starling, Tide, and then Revolut. Okay, so what the hell is going on with Silicon Valley Bank? Now, unless you're in the tech or the startup ecosystem, you've probably never even heard of SVB. Even though it's one of the top 20 banks in the world, I wanted to do a few hot takes from my perspective and what we're doing at So Squared in terms of risk management. Something perhaps SVB should have done themselves. And remember guys, if you're enjoying the content that we're pushing out, make sure that you hit that like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon to stay up to date with all the details. Later on, I'm going to tell you all about what we're doing at So Squared to help mitigate any problems that we foresee because of the SVB bank collapse. Now, it'd be pretty unfair of me to give comment onto what actually happened at SVB, as I'm not a financial advisor. I don't know the full story. A lot of it is hearsay. So I'm going to kind of not go into what may or may not have caused the collapse, but I'm going to kind of talk about it from our perspective and also what we are doing. So let's break this down in a pretty digestible way, and also what we're doing here at So Squared, and actually what that means for the tech and startup ecosystem here in the UK, and not just in the Silicon Valley area. So SVB is widely used by a lot of startups, not that many in the UK, but according to their website, I'm pretty sure they used to boast that 50% of startups bank with them. Now, if that's true, that is incredibly scary. But more importantly, a lot of VCs bank with Silicon Valley Bank, and this is where it gets pretty scary, and this is where we actually realize there is a lot of money trapped within this establishment. Okay, so what does this mean for startups in general? Well, if you're involved in the startup and tech ecosystem, you'll know for like the last 10 years, it's pretty much been going up and to the right. And then during the pandemic, we saw a huge asset class bubble. We literally saw prices soaring. People were receiving 100 times ARR valuations on fundraisers in like 2021. That is absolutely ludicrous. Okay, and some people are going to say that's had a large impact on what has happened here over the last week, but we won't go into that now. Now, the problem is all these asset classes, especially privately held companies, have now started to decline in terms of valuation. The valuations are coming back down, and it's also making it incredibly tricky to raise capital right now. Investors are on caution, and they're even more on caution after the collapse of SVB. Now, if you're a startup looking to raise VC money right now, and that VC banks with Silicon Valley Bank, and you haven't got that cash in your bank already, or the VC didn't manage to get cash out of SVB before it closed, well, chances are you ain't getting that cash anymore. And as a startup, the main reason you raise cash is to accelerate growth, or at least sustain it. Now, most startups burn cash and they're not always revenue generating, so it's pretty common in the startup industry for you to be losing money month on month. Now, the problem is that if you cannot raise money and you have to start cutting costs, this is going to slow innovation, especially if you're really hitting trajectory, you're getting product market fit, but all of a sudden the cash is drying up in your own treasury, you can't raise money from VCs. Effectively, you need to start making some hard decisions and cut back your costs so you can survive as a business. This is just going to stunt your growth. Okay, let's just play out the next scenario then. You're a VC and you don't bank with Silicon Valley Bank. Sweet, but guess what? Some of your portfolio company do. So if you're trying to raise money from these VCs and their portfolio companies actually bank with Silicon Valley Bank, and they're going to be pretty illiquid at the moment because all of their cash is tied up and they can't make payroll. Guess what? The cash that these VCs have is going to go to their portfolio company. Unless they're significantly failing already, that cash is going to go to the portfolio company so they can make payroll. They've already made a bet on these companies. They're not going to be in the business of making new bets when they can save their existing bets. So as a startup trying to raise cash, this is something you need to bear in mind, and it's also something that's probably going to hinder your fundraising. I'm currently raising at the moment. It's been incredibly difficult already. The market conditions have been a nightmare. But what I did was I just had candid conversations with my investors throughout the weekend. I understood their position. I understood what their exposure was on a portfolio level, on a personal level. By speaking to potential new investors, they will appreciate that you're aware of what's going on, and it'll also show that you're taking a pragmatic approach to still fundraising during these tricky conditions. Now, I've seen a lot of comments around this is just an isolated problem in the Bay Area or in the tech and startup world. Now, To some extent, this is true, but if I'm being honest with you, it's super naive to think that this is not going to go further, and actually I think it's extremely dangerous. SVB collapsed in 48 hours. Let me just repeat that. 48 hours it collapsed. This is a publicly traded bank that at the turn of the year was valued at around 14 billion. In 48 hours, it collapsed. Yep, that's how real this is. So let's just look at the impact this could have on the UK tech and startup scene, and maybe even a bit further wide in the business scene. Firstly, there are a few thousand people that do bank with SVB here in the UK. Now, I've seen a few things on LinkedIn and about the UK government already acknowledging this and already trying to navigate this for the businesses that are going to get hit by this. I mean, I'm dubious as to how quick they can move and whether they can provide some relief funds. We'll see how this plays out over the next week. So first of all, the collapse of SVB. If you're in the UK trying to raise capital, you are super naive to think that this will not affect your cap raising. It's not an isolated situation in the Bay Area. Investors will be extremely cautious and will be a lot more nervous about deploying cash right now. So my main concern is a sudden run on the banks. Now, I'm not talking about these big high street banks like your HSBCs, your Barclays, your RBS, etc. I'm talking about these new challenger banks, such as Monzo, Starling, Tide, and then Revolut. And this raises really alarming questions as to whether these banks are protected under FSCS legislation. FYI, FSCS legislation basically means for the UK banking system that you're covered up to 85 grand of your deposits. Now, when we say covered, like that might take a long time to get that money back. The problem is that some of these challenger banks are not UK licensed banks. They have e-money licenses, which are completely different. Noticeably, Revolut is an e-money licensed bank. It is not FSCS protected. Now, Revolut safeguard your money, and in the terms and conditions, they say that they will not use customer deposits to lend out as part of a way to make other money through credit products, etc. So that is some safeguarding. However, I am concerned that a potential run on these challenger banks may cause, maybe not cause liquidity issues, but may cause deposits to be restricted and transactions to also be halted. So it's not all doom and gloom, right? What can you do as a business owner? And this is the risk management perspective. As a business owner, you need to look at your own isolated situations and best look at how you can mitigate any sort of risk that's coming your way. Okay, number one, check with your bank. Check that your bank has got this 85k insurance. If you are nervous and if you're with a challenger bank, even if it does have this insurance policy, move your money into a high street bank savings account or a current account. We've just moved a good chunk of our cash out of our business account into a Barclays Saver account. Now, I can move that back, but it's just an in case. I don't want to be the one stood there holding the bag. So my advice, although I am not in a position to give out any advice, I'm just purely telling you what we are doing here, both me personally and at So Squared. Second, check in with your investors. See how they are. Do they have direct exposure? This is new and existing investors. Do any of their portfolio have exposure? Just speak to them and understand the situation. And third, something to really consider. What are the second, third, fourth wave consequences? How can this impact you further down the line from an operations perspective and how your business is being run? Okay, so my startup is built on Bubble and it's built on these Bubble rails. Now, Bubble bank with SVB. Fortunately, Bubble managed to move their money out, so it's not going to affect the operations. But I saw a bit of a commentary about how far this could go down the supply chain. So let's take Stripe, for example. Okay, Stripe do not bank with Silicon Valley Bank. Now, Stripe is used all over the world by millions of people. So let's say the warehousing where Stripe servers are kept, the air conditioning company and the manufacturers and maintenance, etc., that operate that warehouse, that keep it cool so the servers stay up, let's say they bank with SVB. If they can't make payroll and their air conditioning units go down, and then as a result of that, the servers overheat and then Stripe goes down, that could have a monumental impact on so many people all around the world, all from the air conditioning company going down. I'm pretty sure Stripe have got things in place in case this kind of stuff happens. But as a business owner, look at your supply chain, look at what you need as a business to run on a month by month, week by week, day by day basis, and see whether there is any exposure to Silicon Valley Bank and whether or not you can mitigate that by doing different things. So not exactly a super cheery message today and not really about marketing, but it's a super important topic that's going to be discussed all over the show for the next 1 to 2 weeks and probably months going forward. That's all for today, guys. Peace out.